Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Friday Ramblings. It's time, so let's get rambling and not waste your time. Now, last month we discussed the Hays Code, the original attempt by the movie theater industry to establish guidelines for what should be put in film. Now, we also mentioned that the Hays Code eventually fell by the wayside. This makes sense to a lot of us because, hey, we know movies have a different set of codes nowadays, ratings almost, that let us know if this is something we want to watch. So, with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and discuss this as our follow-up to the Hays Code episode. Let's have some fun and games with this, shall we? So a little bit of backdrop, reminder folks of where we left off before. And that is that in 1966, Jack Valenti, who had become president of the MPAA, as it was then known, now it's simply the MPA. They dropped the of America from it, just because of international business and everything. He deemed that the Motion Picture Production Code, or Hays Code as it was unofficially referred to, was out of date and bared, quote, the odious smell of censorship. Filmmakers had been constantly pushing to have the code revised or put out films without the code's approval. It was obvious that the old system of simply saying you can't put this in films wasn't going to work. Valenti attempted to revise the code to include a label of SMA, suggested for mature audiences, as a stopgap measure. However, it was clear things were going to have to go farther than that, and on November 1st of 1968, the voluntary MPAA film rating system took effect. Now, this means that, again, it was a voluntary rating. The idea was, basically, you submit your film to the MPAA, gives you a rating, everybody knows what the film's going to be about, good to go. Downside of this, though, and where the voluntary kind of becomes more of a joke than a real choice, is that pretty much every major theater distributor in the country agreed that if your film had not been submitted to the MPAA and given a rating, they would not put the film in their theaters because otherwise they couldn't guarantee the audience was going to see something they wanted to see, thus avoiding complaints, protests, all that stuff that was the reason why they had the Hays Code for so many years. So it's kind of a issue. It's like, technically it's voluntary, but if you don't submit to the MPAA, you're pretty much guaranteeing you're never going to get national release, and thus it is almost impossible to post a profit. So there you go. Still, the original rating system, which was used from 1968 to 1970, had 3 official ranks, which was G, suggested for general audiences, M, suggested for mature audiences, parental discretion advised, R for restricted, which meant persons under 16 not admitted unless accompanied by a parent or adult guardian. Now, there was also, because I know a lot of you film buffs are out there, yes, there was an X rating. However, here's what is important. The X rating, which said persons under 16 not admitted, period, was essentially an unofficial rating. It was not part of the MPAA trademark and would not receive the MPAA seal. This meant that any producer who did not submit a film for the MPAA rating could self-apply the X rating, and as such it was, even though it meant if you're under 16 you can't see it, not regulated by the MPAA, and technically there could be stuff in the film that there'd be no problems for somebody under 16 seeing. However, they didn't feel like submitting it to the MPAA because, you have to wait on them to rate it and come back, and there's a cost. For small independent filmmakers, it was a thing. Now that's going to be important to note as we keep going down the history of the MPAA ratings, is that the X is not officially part of the MPAA. It is an unofficial catch-all term that anybody was free to put on their movies. In 1970, the ages for R and X were raised from 16 to 17. Also, there was a bit of confusion over exactly what the M rating meant due to the parental discretion advised line. So, in 1971, the MPAA did their first modification for it. We still had G. The rated M became GP, which meant all ages were admitted, but parental guidance was suggested because the film contained material which may not be suitable for pre-teenagers. Along with the rated R rating standing, though again bumped from 16 to 17 with an accompanying parent, and the pseudo-official X rating, no one under 17, period. Again, though, that only lasted about 2 years. In 1972, up through 1984, GP was switched around to the much more, in modern times, familiar PG. It's a small change, but it is important. So, also the wording went from may not be suitable for pre-teenagers in 1977 to children specifically, reinforcing the division between PG and R, being for your teenage audience. But remember when we said that only worked until 1984? That's right. You see, two movies that were extremely popular movies, major hit movies, kind of rocked the boat. And that is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins. Now, there were other movies that were part of this group, but these were the two that got the most media, the most publicity, and thus are the biggest punches to the MPAA system being not systematic enough. The problem is that because the movies did not have a large amount of violence and gore and really no major sexuality, some implications, some jokes, but nothing woohoo blatant, the movies got a PG rating. And thus, younger children went to go see them with their parents, and the movies were too intense for those children, and they should be. Temple of Doom has the guy pulling the beating heart out of the man's chest and holding it up, and it catches on fire. Gremlins is a dark comedy / horror movie. There is some genuinely creepy parts in that, especially with it taking place in the backdrop of Christmas. Not the first movie to put a little horror into Christmas, but certainly an iconic one. Yeah, a lot of parents were upset because they thought they did not expect the level of content that they got from those movies. Thus, they were in a bit of a problem. The MPAA would either have to greatly expand what is considered the R rating, and in the process, a lot of films would run the risk of attracting much smaller audiences, and them also look like they are being a little, to a lot of people, conservatives saying, oh, no, nobody should ever see this content until they're 17, when really it would have been okay for, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, just not 10 and 11-year-olds kind of situation. What do? We're going to create one more category for you. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. This is when everybody's favorite, the PG-13 rating, kicked in. Highly encouraged by Steven Spielberg, director of Temple of Doom and executive producer of Gremlins, PG-13 rating was initially introduced on July 1st, 1984. First film to be released with this rating was Red Dawn. In 1985, the wording was simplified, and thus we have the rating system that most of us grew up with. Officially used from 1984 to 1990, you had rated G, general audiences, rated PG, parental guidance suggested, rated PG-13, parents strongly cautioned, as some material may be inappropriate for children under 13. Our old buddy rated R for under 17, requiring accompanying parent or adult guardian, and of course the pseudo rating X, nobody under 17 admitted, period. Now, it should be noted during the same period, the MPAA won a trademark infringement lawsuit against the producers and distributors of I Spit on Your Grave, the 1978 rape revenge film, over a fraudulent application of its R rating to the uncut version of the film, thus showing the first major time the MPAA actually enforced the fact that you do not put a rating on your movie unless we tell you what that rating is. And yeah, if you release different cuts of movies, you have to resubmit those cuts for new ratings because obviously you're changing the content. This was an important precedent and helped raise the infamy of this movie, which has since seen various sequels and remakes. Now we keep talking about how X is a pseudo rating because it was not officially trademarked by the MPAA and did not have the regulations behind it that the other ratings did. Well, here's the biggest issue with that. The studios that were most likely to just say, we don't need the MPAA rating, we'll just slap an X on it, were pornographic films. Now, there's nothing wrong inherently in and of itself with that. The X rating made sure that theaters did not let anybody under 17 into those films. And frankly, the MPAA probably wasn't that thrilled at the idea of watching these movies when they knew what kind of rating they were going to have to give it anyway. It's like, dude, it's not like any of your stuff's going to get a PG rating. It's porn. However, because other films would get the X rating, whether because they had a level of gore and violence that even for the R rating was pretty intense, or again, distributors were smaller studios and felt like it was not financially beneficial for them to let the MPAA take their sweet time rating the movies and charging them for the cost of rating them. It's a whole thing. Things had to change. Thus, in September 1990, the MPAA introduced the rating of NC-17, no children under 17 admitted. This allowed them to take movies that definitely were not made for anybody who's not an adult to see, have a rating that, because NC-17 was an official MPAA rating and trademarked, could be separated from the various pornographic films and the infamousy of the X rating. Now, I've kind of bounced around this, but I'm going to go ahead and say this is why Also, because the X rating was not fully trademarked and regulated by the MPAA, you eventually had XX, triple X films, because frankly the studio could put however many X's they wanted on it. The idea being that the more X's, the more intense the film was. That was just marketing nonsense. So, this means from 1990 to 1996, you had rated G for general audiences, rated PG for parental guidance suggested, rated PG-13 for parents strongly cautioned if your child is under the age of 13, rated R because it is restricted to anybody under 17 unless they have an accompanying parent or guardian, and the brand new rated NC-17, no children under 17 admitted, period. In 1996, the minimum age for NC-17 rated films was raised to 18 by rewording it to no one 17 and under admitted. And this is the modern formula we have today. The only major differences has been in the 21st century. They have begun listing more detailed descriptions about why the films have this particular rating. Thus, instead of simply, hey, it's rated R, your 15-year-old's not going to see it unless you go with him, to, look, we rated it R because there's a lot of blood and gore and a lot of swearing in it. Or we rated it rated R because there's some mild sexual content and there's a lot of drinking and drug use in it. Thus, the parents could be better informed on if it was something they wanted their child to see, even if it was in their presence. Or to flat out say, no, you are not getting exposed to this stuff until you are 17 and older and can make this up decision for yourself because you're now a legal adult. This is, highly beneficial. Now, of course, I use the R as an example, but these explanations are on every rating. For instance, you'll often see a lot of animated, family-friendly films that get a PG rating specifying, well, it's PG because there's cartoon-style violence. Like the old Looney Tunes. Well, technically people are hitting each other, but it's not causing any real harm. It's not frightening violence, but it is there if you are somebody who wants to not expose your child to any form of violence at all. That's another classic example. Still, this is your MPAA system as it exists today, and how we got there. Again, the major things that they look for when discussing ratings are violence. Violence must be kept to a minimum in G and PG rated films. Depictions of intense violence can be permitted under the PG-13 rating. While violence that is both realistic and extreme or persistent, most of your action films are going to net you an R rating. Language. Again, the amount of profanity and the degree of the profanity will affect your rating. There was an infamous urban legend that films rated PG-13 are only able to use the explicitive fuck. And I know I try not to curse in my videos, but we're using this in a explanatory context. Bear with me, folks. But you can only use that particular expletive once to avoid an R rating for language. However, this is not an official policy. There are several exceptional cases in which PG-13 rated films do contain multiple occurrences of the F word. For instance, the 1987 teen comedy film Adventures in Babysitting, where the word is used twice in the same scene. Antoine Fisher from 2002, which has 3 uses. And Gunner Palace, documentary of soldiers in the Second Gulf War, which has 42 uses of the word with 2 used in a sexual context, among various others. Now, this is This idea was satirized in the 2005 film Be Cool, featuring John Travolta, in which the movie producer Chili Palmer says, "Do you know that unless you're willing to use the R rating, you can only say the F word once?" You know what I say? F that, I'm done. Of course, as I said, this is not a hard rule. The other things that will greatly impact your rating is substance use and abuse. Drug use content is restricted to PG-13 and above. This was a major importance of the film Whale Rider, a 2002 New Zealand drama film, which would have been a PG-rated film except for the momentary references to use of illegal drugs. Specifically, drug paraphernalia being visible on screen. Roger Ebert himself criticized that, as he felt it was not a major enough reason to bump it up a whole nother rating scale. But it's the whole thing. In 2007, this substance use was expanded to depictions of cigarette smoking. As, you know, we're very anti-smoking culture here in America now. I'm not going to weigh in on that debate. And of course, nudity. Nudity is restricted to PG and above, and anything that constitutes more than brief nudity will require at least a PG-13 rating. Nudity that is sexually oriented, as opposed to, comedic use, like, oh no, somebody's stumbling around the house and accidentally, walks in on somebody taking a shower, and we get a couple seconds before she covers herself with a curtain, But yes, nudity put in a blatant sexual content will 9 out of 10 times nab you an R rating. 2010, the MPAA infamously flagged 3 films specifically for male nudity. And in 2018, the MPAA ratings chair, Joan Graves, clarified the MPAA's position by stating, "We don't usually define nudity as male or female. Usually we just mention partial nudity or graphic nudity, but again, because of the context of the scenes, it was clarified in a handful of instances." And of course, when discussing nudity in a sexual context, we must discuss sex itself. Officially, the MPAA does not have any explicit criteria for sexual content other than excluding sex from G-rated films. So, how much has the MPAA ratings actually affected films? Well, The Exorcist, which was originally going to get an X rating due to the intense nature of it, as well as the massive religious implications in the movie, Catholic exorcist, possession by demons. Shouldn't have to explain too much the religious sensitivity this can bring up in a lot of people. That, and we've just already had excellent discussions on The Exorcist. Many people have. An iconic film. Still, the president of the ratings board, Aaron Stern, took the unusual step of calling director William Friedkin to tell him that since it was such a, quote, important film, it would be rated R and could be released without any cuts. The film drew huge crowds upon its release. However, many people did have very intense reactions to it, including a psychiatric journal that would later document 4 cases of cinematic neurosis induced by the film. Now, among the patrons were many children, not always accompanied by adults. Now, to be fair, it did have an R rating, which means those children should not have been in those theaters without being accompanied by an adult, but people still felt that the MPAA failed by not giving it, giving it an R rating instead of something more intense. Thing is, they didn't have the NC-17 yet. They would have had to put an X rating, which means it would have been nebulous. A lot of people would have thought it probably had pornographic content. We discussed this earlier. Examples like this are why we got the NC-17 rating in the 90s. Now, of course, as part of this greater scandal, there was accusations of peer pressure to get at that rating. And when it's all said and done, Aaron Stern was replaced as president of the board by Richard Hefner. In 1976, he eventually got the board to give the Japanese martial arts film The Street Fighter, not related to the video game franchise, an X rating for its graphic violence, the first time a film had earned that rating purely for violence. Now, similar to the X rating it replaced, the NC-17 rating has often been considered a kiss of death for any film that seeks to make a financial profit because, once again, you are not going to get any teenage profits. And even then, many adults will consider that, hey, I'm, somebody that's not super into very intense things. I'm sure this movie's not going to have anything for me. This has led to the Directors Guild of America criticizing the NC-17 rating, quote, calling it an abject failure, and quote, not only compromising filmmakers' visions, but also greatly increasing the likelihood that adult-oriented movies are seen by the very groups for which they are not intended. As many films that are initially given an NC-17 rating are recut to get them a strong R rating, thus opening them up for audiences that the directors and scriptwriters never intended the movie to be seen by. So the NC-17 rating is something that is hotly debated anytime it is applied to a film, or a film infamously re-edits and submits itself to get just past that line down to R rating. But no system's perfect. Still, it is a system we have today. We're not done yet, though, folks, because we've discussed movie ratings. Movies are not the only form of entertainment. There's television. There's video games. There's music. There's comic books. That's right, folks. In the coming months, we will have more discussions of entertainment ratings for you so that you can not only know the full history behind this and the simple fact that more often than not, these kind of ratings things are done specifically to avoid the federal government from stepping in and exercising even more authority over daily life and business than it already has. And more key to all my fans, because I do love all my fans and viewers, to make sure you understand exactly what the ratings mean so that you can make educated decisions and enjoy your entertainment. That's what we're all about here at Roulette Productions. So if you want to see those future discussions, as well as any other topic I decide to ramble about, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you click that notification bell, and drop a comment, because I always love seeing comments. I will respond, though it may not necessarily be super rapid, as I do have a day job. Sorry. I'm not one of those crazy people making, big money off the internet and social media. Sad for all of us. I would much rather do this than work for a living. Still, I will be here every Friday for you. So tune in, enjoy yourself, and remember, there's nothing wrong with rambling.